Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
First, the U.S. is on track for a government shutdown in just 4 days, October 1st. That's despite some progress after talks that carried into the early morning hours. Bloomberg's Amy Morris has the very latest from Washington.
Senate leaders introduced their own bill to avert a shutdown, and in the House, Speaker Kevin McCarthy launched a debate on a series of full-year spending bills. But in the Senate, Republican Rand Paul is threatening to slow it down because it includes aid for Ukraine. It's likely dead on arrival in the House anyway, where conservative hardliners say they'll try to oust Speaker McCarthy if he allows that bill to come to a vote. However, moderate House Republicans are preparing to join Democrats to force a vote on the bipartisan Senate bill, even without McCarthy's approval. In Washington, I'm Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Amy, thank you. Well, another major political story we're following this morning involves more legal trouble for former President Donald Trump. And we get the latest with Bloomberg's John Tucker in New York. John, good morning.
And Karen, a Manhattan judge ruled that Donald Trump committed fraud for years running his business venture. It's a major blow to the former president in the biggest civil case against him that's scheduled to go to trial next week. The judge ordered some of the former president's companies removed from Trump's control and dissolved. He ruled that Trump and his associates massively overvalued his assets on paperwork used in making deals and securing loans. The trial will now only determine just how much punitive damage Trump will have to pay. The New York Attorney General, Letitia James, is asking for at least $250 million in damages. Trump's attorneys say they will appeal. In New York, I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
Okay, John, thanks. Now, former President Trump is not going to be participating in tonight's second Republican presidential debate. 7 other candidates will be there. It's being held at the Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California.
While the candidates get ready to debate, Nathan, the United Auto Workers will be back out on picket lines for day 13 of their strike. President Biden joined them outside a GM plant near Detroit and urged them to stick with it.
You guys, the UAW, you saved the automobile industry back in 2008 and before. Made a lot of sacrifices. Gave up a lot. And the companies were in trouble. But now they're doing incredibly well. And guess what? You should be doing incredibly well, too.
The president took up a bullhorn and said the union should be able to bargain for 40% pay hikes. Acting Labor Secretary Julie Hsu and Senior White House Advisor Gene Sperling are staying in Michigan to aid the negotiating process.
Well, meanwhile, Karen, another labor dispute is officially over. Hollywood screenwriters are headed back to work. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has that story from California.
After almost 5 months, the governing boards on both coasts have approved the deal. They've provided copies to members, and they will vote, but the leaders have authorized to get them back on the job. The writers get a 5% increase in the first year. Studios will share viewer data for programs streaming with the potential of bonus payments. A minimum number of writers working a program, among other things. Now it's work on the after-SAG deal. In California, I'm Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Ed, thanks. We turn to the markets now. We're watching shares of Amazon. They are up 0.25% in early trading, and this follows yesterday's 4% drop after the Federal Trade Commission sued Amazon in a long-anticipated antitrust case. FTC Chair Lina Khan told Bloomberg the e-commerce giant is using a range of tactics to hurt sellers and consumers.
Ultimately, Amazon has pursued them to deprive actual and potential competitors of the ability to gain the scale and momentum needed to effectively compete online. And having achieved and protected its monopoly power, our complaint details how Amazon is now exploiting that monopoly power in ways that harm customers.
Khan stopped short of calling for Amazon to be broken up, but added if the regulator wins the suit, it would seek to restore competition in the market. Amazon says it will defend itself against the claims. For the full conversation with the FTC chair, head to the Bloomberg Talks podcast feed. Download it wherever you get your podcasts.
In another legal news, Karen, consulting firm McKinsey has agreed to pay $230 million in its latest settlement of lawsuits blaming the company for its role advising opioid manufacturers. The proposed accord with local governments and school districts would resolve allegations that McKinsey helped fuel the country's opioid epidemic by providing sales analysis and marketing advice to makers of highly addictive painkillers, including Purdue Pharma and Johnson & Johnson.
Melanesia, Nathan, China has placed the billionaire chairman of Evergrande under effective house arrest, and Bloomberg's Brian Curtis has more from Hong Kong.
Sources say Hui Kai-yan was taken away by police and is being held at a designated location. It's not clear why he's under so-called residential surveillance. That's a police action that falls short of arrest. And it also doesn't mean that Hui will eventually be charged with a crime. Still, it means that he's unable to leave the location, meet, or communicate with others without approval. It's another sign that Evergrande has entered the criminal justice system. Other former executives have reportedly also been detained. In Hong Kong, Brian Curtis, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Nathan, thanks. And time now for a look at some of the other stories making news around the world. For that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Amy Morris. Amy, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Looters have ransacked a series of stores in the Center City section of Philadelphia. This is a lot of looting. Mass looting began shortly after a peaceful protest concluded near City Hall yesterday. First Deputy Commissioner Field Operations John M. Stafford Jr. explains.
At this point in time, we know somewhere around 15 to 20 arrests. At least 2 firearms have been recovered. This investigation is ongoing.
Demonstrators had gathered at City Hall earlier yesterday evening. They were protesting the dismissal of charges against a former Philadelphia police officer accused of shooting and killing a man named Eddie Izarazi. That was during a traffic stop. Now, police say protests were peaceful and had nothing to do with the looting that followed. The Mexican government has begun negotiating with countries in Central and South America to try to stop people from trying to reach the U.S. border. They'll start taking into custody those that are expelled at the international bridge connecting El Paso and Juarez. In a statement, they say Customs and Border Protection also offered to help. The stakes are expected to be higher for the second Republican presidential debate tonight. University of Miami's George Gonzalez says there are 7 candidates, including the frontrunner, former President Donald Trump, who calls the debates stupid.
Not only does he not need to share the stage with his other candidates, but it would potentially be detrimental to him, his candidacy, if he did share the stage.
So Trump won't be there, but the latest Real Clear Politics shows he is in the lead with 59% support ahead of Governor Ron DeSantis at 16% and Nikki Haley at 7%. All eyes are on DeSantis, though, who has to do well on tonight's debate stage to help rebuild his momentum. A growing number of Democrats are calling on New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez to step down after he was indicted on federal bribery charges. Fellow New Jersey Senator Cory Booker has called on Menendez to resign, saying there's a higher standard for public officials. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi tells MSNBC, yes, Menendez should step down.
And it'd probably be a good idea if he did resign.
Menendez criticized the Democrats calling for his resignation, saying they're judging him before all the facts are out. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg Karen.
All right, Amy, thank you. Well, we bring you news throughout the day here on Bloomberg Radio, but now you can get the latest news on demand whenever you want it. Subscribe to Bloomberg News Now to get the latest headlines at the click of a button. Get informed on your schedule. You can listen and subscribe to Bloomberg News Now on the Bloomberg Business app, Bloomberg.com, plus Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with John Stashower. John.
Karen, it was an emotional night in Baltimore. Brooks Robinson was known as Mr. Oriole. He passed away at the age of 86, an 18-time All-Star, a 16-time Gold Glove winner, and a first-ballot Hall of Famer. The Orioles then hosted the Nationals. Gunnar Henderson hit a leadoff home run. It was the only run of the game. Baltimore, behind the pitching of Kyle Bradish, won 1-0, moving closer to winning the AL East. Tampa Bay did keep pace, winning 9-7 at Boston. The Rays had a 7-0 lead and then held on. Things got closer in the AL West as Texas' 6-game win streak came to an end, losing to the Angels 9-3, and Seattle ended a 4-game losing streak 6-2 over Houston. Toronto hoping for a wild card. Blue Jays had only 3 hits, lost to the Yankees 2-0. The Cubs are in the hunt for a wild card. They had a 6-0 lead, 6th inning in Atlanta, and then things fell apart.
And the 3-2. Swung on a fly ball out towards right center field. Suzuki over to his right with room. He dropped it. He dropped the ball. 2-run score. Oh, my. He was right there, and Suzuki lost it. What a break for the Braves, and they have the lead.
6-8 advantage in Atlanta. Atlanta won 7-6. Will that cost the Cubs a playoff spot? Arizona beat the White Sox 15-4. Milwaukee clinched the NL Central, lost to St. Louis 4-1, but they clinched with that Cubs loss. And the Phillies clinched the first wild card. They beat the Pirates 3-2 in 10 innings. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports.
From coast to coast, from New York to San Francisco, Boston to Washington, D.C., nationwide on SiriusXM, the Bloomberg Business app, and Bloomberg.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. Amazon is facing its most significant lawsuit in its more than 30 years in business, and it is a career-defining moment for Lina Khan, the head of the Federal Trade Commission. Stopped by Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. bureau just hours after the case was filed. Speaking with Bloomberg's Peggy Collins, Lina Khan said businesses that want to sell their goods online are forced to pay Amazon's rates, including for advertising and logistics services. Let's listen in to part of that conversation now.
So look, this is a case about a set of unlawful tactics that Amazon has used to maintain its monopolies. We note in the complaint both a set of anti-discounting tactics that Amazon uses to punish any seller or retailer that dares to discount. And ultimately, these sets of tactics deter sellers and retailers from lowering prices and closes off an entire dimension of price competition. The other set of tactics we note is a coercive scheme that Amazon uses to effectively require sellers use its fulfillment service. And this, in turn, ends up stunting the development of independent fulfillment providers and ultimately also deprives actual and potential rivals of scale. And that's really the core theme here. These are a set of tactics, but ultimately Amazon has pursued them to deprive actual and potential competitors of the ability to gain the scale and momentum needed to effectively compete online. And having achieved and protected its monopoly power, our complaint details how Amazon is now exploiting that monopoly power in ways that harm customers, both the sellers, the tens of millions of American families that use Amazon to do their shopping, but also both the shoppers, but also the sellers, the hundreds of thousands, the tens of thousands of sellers that use Amazon to access those shoppers. And it's done that through actively raising prices. Amazon takes close to $1 out of every $2 from sellers that use its platform. It's also degraded its service by adding a whole set of pay-to-play ads that make it more difficult for consumers to find what they're looking for and steers them to higher price products. So really encourage everybody to read the complaint. It details all of this conduct in great detail, and we're really looking forward to moving forward with it.
So one of the things in the complaint is this phrase structural relief, that you're seeking structural relief in this case, which implies a breakup. What would that look like?
So at this stage, the complaint is really focused on the issue of liability. We lay out a scheme that we believe violates the U.S. antitrust laws. What we note in the complaint is that these different aspects of Amazon's scheme have an aggregated effect. So the harm is accumulating. There are feedback loops between the harms. And so the net exclusionary effect of Amazon's conduct is quite significant. Ultimately, we'll want to make sure that any remedy is halting the illegal conduct, preventing a recurrence, and ensuring that Amazon is not able to profit and benefit from its illegal behavior. So right now, we're squarely focused on the question of liability, but when we get to the issue of remedy, those are going to be the principles we'll be focused on.
What do you think the company should be doing differently?
So the complaint lays out a set of tactics that we believe are illegal and that are illegally elevating and inflating prices for the American people. So at the very least, any relief would require that the company halt those tactics. But as I noted, effective relief also needs to be restoring competition to this market, which we'll be asking the judge to do as well.
And when you think about the prospect for winning the case, how would things change for consumers and sellers if you do, in fact, win?
So this case is ultimately about competition, and competition that has been foregone because of Amazon's unlawful tactics, as the complaint lays out. As a result of that, people are paying higher prices, right? Consumers are paying more than they otherwise would. Small businesses are having to pay a 50% Amazon tax right now. And so ultimately, the complaint is seeking to restore the lost promise of competition. Greater competition will mean lower prices, better quality, better selection, and greater innovation. And that's ultimately what this case is about.
So Amazon will say that it's providing a platform that has a mix of products on it, but also when it comes to merchants on its platform, it's offering more and more services to them, shipping, delivery, advertising, in terms of why they're like the charges that they have. How do you respond to that?
So the complaint really goes in some detail about the different ways that this tax effectively has been increasing steadily, and the way that can be direct evidence of monopoly power. Interestingly, at various points, Amazon did experiment with giving sellers more leeway to use seller fulfilled Prime, but once Amazon recognized that would threaten its monopoly power, it switched that off, even though sellers were effectively meeting the same standards that FBA does. So, the complaint really goes through all of this in great detail and lays out why we believe these are unlawful tactics that are hurting the American people.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, Sirius XM Channel 119, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.